Police officers, what is the dumbest reason you have been called? I was dispatched to a house reference a reported vandalism to a vehicle. When I got there, the guy who called was standing by his car. I saw that there was no visible damage to the vehicle. His complaint was that dust picked by the wind was coming from his neighbor's yard and landing on his car. The guy actually wanted to file a criminal complaint. My first thought was maybe I was dreaming this nonsense. All I could do in response was stare at him, and I said absolutely nothing. The guy became uncomfortable and explained his complaint again. I couldn't help but just stare at him. At the time, I didn't think I could say anything to him that didn't sound insulting. I think he finally got it since he just went inside his house and never called us again. Elio dispatcher here. A lady called in a 911 to report her baby back rib stole right off at their grill, while another called in to report that a plane was flying low. Do I look like the FAA or Shane's ribs? We dispatched and aired lookouts on both. Deputies called into radio practically crying at 3 a.m. They were laughing so hard when I confirmed the unit for larceny. She wants her baby back ribs over our radio. So many. A woman found a half-eaten sandwich in her unfenced backyard. She thinks someone threw it there to poison her dog. She saved the sandwich and wanted us to test it for poison. A man called because his trampoline was blowing away in a windstorm. One woman called because someone stole her American flag from her front yard. One of those little tiny yard flags that are about 1 foot tall and planting your grass. She called the morning after a particularly bad and windy thunderstorm. I had to explain to her that it's much more likely that the flag blew away than someone maliciously stole a 50-cent flag. I then found in a nearby sewer drain. My dog is acting strange. Can you send a police officer? Happens more than you'd think. My favorite is people who call in because people are driving too fast through the neighborhoods. So we go out there and run radar. 9 times out of 10, the person caught speeding is the person who called in the complaint to begin with. I live in a neighborhood. I drive a black car and it looks sporty. So I routinely have moms with strollers telling me to slow down. And I'm always going 15 miles an hour under the speed limit. They got to where they would be waiting for me to come home to yell at me. They called the cops. The cops sat in the woods for apparently 2 weeks getting my speeds. I didn't know. I couldn't see them. Welp clocked me under every day going to work and back. They ended up telling the women to leave me alone or they would arrest them for harassment without me even asking him to do anything. Worked for the local newspaper, and we got to read all the calls to the cops. The most hilarious one was from a woman who called in to report a man driving around in his van, playing loud music and luring kids. When the cops showed up, it was Ice Cream Man. I wish I was making this up. Some people are just nosy busybodies. Edit. Holy shit, snacks, this blew up. Thank you to the kind stranger who popped my Reddit gold. This may be apropos of nothing, but I called the police once because there was a guy wandering the mall parking lot across the street from my house screaming fuck as loudly as possible and seemed to be trying to force his way into the mall. I didn't call 911, just police HQ because it wasn't an emergency. 9 cruisers showed up within 5 minutes. Must have been a slow night. Once responded to a call originating in the sheriff's department parking lot. Literally walked out of the doors into the following fustercluck. A woman who had just gotten released from jail's ex-girlfriend came to pick her up, drunk, on a moped. The reason it got reported is that the drunk woman was doing donuts in our parking lot waiting for her ex, lost control, and rammed a police car. My training sergeant always had a saying that ran true that day. We don't catch the smart ones. I'm not a police officer, but I liked a Facebook page where all calls to police for incidences are posted for the county. The center of my hometown is the crossroads of 2 major state highways, and they've slowly been expanding them. Traffic is super congested in town, and I repeatedly see posts like this. Officers called the intersection of 34 and 47 because light is taking too long to change. Or, officers called the intersection of 34 and 47 because lights have changed, but cars remain stopped. Really, people? This construction has been going on for years, but you're still confused? I'm not a cop, but a few years ago, when I was moving into a house, I was doing most of my moving late at night. The nosy old couple across the street kept calling the cops and reporting suspicious activity. The first time the cops showed up, they were prepared for a criminal. Hands on guns, flashlights in my eyes. But by the 4th time, they just BS'd with me and finally told the couple to stop calling the police. I'm not sure what made the couple think burglars would bring stuff into the house instead of taking it out. My uncle is a firefighter in Florida, and I got to ride along with him for the day in the truck. We got 3 calls during the day. 1, a lady called saying she was too fat to get into her car. Upon arriving, she was in her car. 2, a guy called saying he saw a giant fireball in the trees in his backyard. There was no sign of any fire when we got there. 3. A lady called saying she was having a heart attack. She was not. The last one isn't dumb. I'm not a firefighter, but I'd rather be called for a false heart attack than not being called for a heart attack. I'm a commercial vehicle officer. A lot of my time is spent working way stations in my area. One day I heard a bolo, be on the lookout for, locate for a stolen tractor-trailer combination coming from a neighboring city over my radio. The guy stole it from a company yard, pushing another vehicle out of the way with his newly acquired Kenworth in the process of fleeing. He drove to another city to pick up a prostitute tweaker and headed back into my town. Driving a truck he knew was reported stolen, he pulled into my open way station to get weighed, carrying stolen freight that came with the stolen truck. The guy went easy. His friend locked herself in the truck until local police arrived to take the arrest. I went to court over it, and the reaction from the grand jurors when I explained the situation to them was pretty good. I'm Border Patrol, and the absolute dumbest reason I've ever been called was a break-in on a house. Sounds reasonable, right? The house was 50 feet from the border and had footprints heading to the house, then back down south to Mexico. The only thing the aliens took was some packages this guy had. Fortunately, they left a couple behind, which totaled 101.4 pounds of marijuana. We arrested the idiot for felony possession, when he said the least you can do is get the rest of my stuff. I'm an EMT and was listening to the police channel on the radio one night. We hear, County to District X cars. We just had a female caller state that there is a black male wearing a hoodie walking down her street. Unit on the road? Okay. What does she want us to do? Dispath. No idea. My partner and I laughed for a good half hour over that one. I had a friend whose mom worked for the city. She would get complaints all the time for the dumbest things in the rich neighborhoods. She got a call for there being too much salt on the road in the wintertime, and a signed petition from everyone in the neighborhood to get rid of a nearby car mechanic because they thought his shop was too trashy, even though he'd be in business there for 20 years before the development was built. Signed petition from everyone in the neighborhood to get rid of a nearby car mechanic because they thought his shop was too trashy, even though he'd be in business there for 20 years before the development was built. This stupid shit makes me furious. Those fucking idiots bought houses in that neighborhood knowing there was a car mechanic shop right down the street, and yet he is somehow in the wrong because they don't like living next to his business? They should have bought homes somewhere else then. Cop here. Dumbest reason for being called to a scene. Lady called and wanted us to tell her son to go to school. One of our stations had a carnival fundraiser and the street was closed. Someone called and complained there was a Ferris wheel obstructing traffic. Someone called in for theft from the city. The suspect was stealing recyclables from the trash can. Gas-powered leaf blower use is illegal. This is possibly the lowest priority on my list of things I don't care about. I'm sure there are more, but these are what came to mind. 911 dispatcher here, not an officer. But I once dispatched an officer to assist a subject whose cat was experiencing respiratory distress. The poor girl, teenager, was in tears, which only got worse when I told her that I couldn't send her a medic, which was what she was requesting. I felt so bad. And since the officer wasn't on anything, I told her I'd at least send him to see if he could do anything. Turned out the cat was having a problem with its meds. It survived. Cop here. We have a guy in town who is paraplegic and confined to a wheelchair. He also has a totally abrasive personality and is an all-around awful person. The county pays for a caretaker, but he either fires them or they quit because they won't cater to his unreasonable demands. He called 911 once because his trash cans didn't get moved to the curb before trash day, and he wanted the police to come do it for him. The dispatcher routed me the call. I called into dispatch and told them that I was absolutely not going out to put this guy's trash cans out. They ended up sending the fire department out after enough cops mutinied and refused to go. My neighbor hated my Mustang. He started calling the cops on me for drag racing. No, I'm accelerating to the speed limit of 45 from a stop sign. Anyway, he started calling the cops on me when it was a pickup truck, the UPS truck, the garbage man, etc. If he heard a V8, it had to be me. I spent a couple weeks in Germany. One night my parents get a knock on the door. It's the police. They had reports of me drag racing again. My parents handed the officers my keys and said, he's been out of the country for 2 weeks. You can go feel the engine if you want. The police apologized for disrupting my parents' evening. My grandma was recovering from surgery in the hospital once. She had to share the room with this senile woman. I was really young, but this woman was so memorable. Whenever she needed something, hungry, bed raised, whatever, she would dial out to 911 like multiple times in an hour. Because you call 911 for help. I guess eventually dispatch called the hospital and told the nurse's station what was happening, and they had to go in there and talk to her about it. Hilarious though. My sister called the cops on me when we were kids because I was mean to her. I was babysitting her, and she wouldn't leave my room, literally like protesting, and wouldn't get off my bed. So I gave her a dead leg, and she stormed off crying. Like 10 minutes later, she comes in running, begging for my forgiveness. Cops rang the doorbell a couple minutes later. The cops, my mother, and I were not amused. Best friend of mine is a state trooper. They have this little old lonely lady that calls and tells the dispatcher that there are aliens/demons in her house and needs help. When the troopers respond, they check the house and sometimes yell that whatever is there has to leave. For this service, she gives them a huge box of cookies. They bicker with each other as to who gets to go that day. This happens at least twice a month. Edit words. I'm a security guard, and I found a homeless 300-plus pound woman with gorilla hands with a backpack full of 40s and a chicken on a leash trying to sleep in a McDonald's parking space. She kept calling me a pervert rent-a-cop. I had a tear of joy because she called me a cop. Made me feel like less of a loser. Her chicken seemed very well behaved. True story. I'm not a police officer, but one time my friends and I, around 18 years old at the time, had the cops called on us for fishing in a nice suburban neighborhood lake. Some HOA lady spotted us, marched around the lake to us, and barked about how we were trespassing and she was calling the police. We politely offered to leave and ran into the responding officers as they were arriving. Officer number 1 stayed with us while officer number 2 went to talk the HOA lady down. Officer number 1 laughed about the whole situation and talked with us about how terrible HOAs are. Officer 2 managed to convince HOA lady not to try to charge us with trespassing, and we left after thanking the officers. Some people just think the police are their personal strong arm. Tangentially related, did a coup at my city's fire department. They told me a story about how the local animal shelter people called then about going to help a ghost who had his leg stuck in the ice on a frozen river. It wasn't a busy day, so they ride out there, hop a fence, suit up in ice water rescue gear, start making their way onto the ice, and the goose flies away. Edit. Whoops, didn't notice that typo, think I'll leave it though. So sad that there was an autocorrect fail in the middle that is only obvious at the end, and realizing it ruins the story. Sad face. I used to work at a full-service gas station, and this lady's gas door fell off. So I informed her of this fact and went about my business. When she was finished fueling, she went and parked, which was not unusual. About 10 minutes later, the cops came along to have a chat with me about damaging a customer's car, and I was perplexed until the lady comes running inside and just starts shrieking at me about the stupid gas door. Once she calmed down and the cop figured out what the actual problem was, he was pretty cool about it and let me go without any hassle, and he dealt with the lady himself. Once I was sitting in my car outside my friend's house waiting for him to get home, since he was running late with whatever he was doing. It couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. Neighbors outside were eyeing me weird and waiting around in their truck in the driveway. Out of nowhere, 2 squad cars show up, blocking both sides of my car, and start interrogating me. Turns out the neighbors claimed I was a child molester trying to entice their children into my car. When the police got there, the neighbors zoomed away as if they did God's work. I was just sitting there using Duolingo on my phone. Didn't have my license on me, and the car was still registered under my in-law's name at the time, but I happened to have my passport on me. Just recently lost my wallet. After a few questions, they were cool, and one of the officers even started talking about video games with me while I was waiting for my passport. TLDR, sitting in your car too long makes you a pedophile. I'm a bit late to this party, but I once got a call that the driver was upset because the passenger was laughing at her. I took it as beat information and did not respond to the scene. Another time, someone called in a live tiger wandering on the shoulder of the freeway. I was unable to find said tiger. Sad face. So we have a strip of bars where I work where every weekend they shut down the 2 roads these bars are on, and it's foot traffic only. In order to deal with the drunks, we amp up the police presence and make ourselves seen. We patrol on foot, bikes, and a mounted unit horses. So one night, it's 2 a.m., I'm out patrolling these bars and get called to a fight between 2 girls. I run around the corner and up the road and find I'm like the 6th or 7th copper there. I look around and no one is doing anything, then I see 2 girls fighting. Still no one does anything. I say, "Sarge, what's going on?" Before I can spit out the last word, he puts up his hand and says, "Just watch." Then I look at the 2 chicks. One bends down and grabs a handful of horse manure and smashes it in the other girl's face/hair. Sarge says, "That's the 3rd time they've done that. We let them finish their fight. When they got tired, we let them go unconditionally." Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.